Chapter 7. The First Day. April 30th, 1975, was a historic day that no Vietnamese, whether inside the country or living in exile around the world, could ever forget. I woke up early, even though I hadn't slept the previous night. My wife was still sound asleep. I didn't want to wake her up because I wanted her to remain mentally at peace, even if the worst were to happen that morning. The street in front of my mother's house was noisy, despite the curfew still being in effect. People were moving around chaotically, and motorcycle horns were blaring. I knew something was about to happen because the night before, I had heard rumors about the country losing the war on the radio. I truly didn't understand why the so-called free press agencies around the world constantly spread information that benefited the enemy like that. The massacre at My Lai and the image of Colonel Nguyen Ngoc Loan, the head of the South Vietnamese police, shooting a VC during the Tet Offensive, were published in many newspapers and journals, but I had never seen any images of the massacres in the city of Hue or Quang Tri province when the Viet Cong temporarily occupied those cities, or images of children at a primary school in Cai Lei province being killed by VC shelling. A war considered the longest and most devastating since World War II could not avoid the killing of innocent civilians. The propaganda of these information agencies allowed the communists to appear righteous, while the so-called allies lost public support. I was waiting for the national crisis with an immense sense of despair. The people seemed so used to the war that they went about their lives as usual. I couldn't tell who was a VC and who wasn't because everyone was Vietnamese. This was one of the difficulties I faced in my daily duties. Sometimes I thought that ending the war might be better for my people, no matter which side won. We were all Vietnamese, whether communist or capitalist. What I hoped for was that my people would live in peace and prosperity. A century of colonialism and 30 years of war had reduced our country to one of the poorest and most shattered nations in the world. If the communists could bring happiness and prosperity to the people, then their victory would truly be deserved. My life is just like a grain of sand in a desert, and if I were to die, it wouldn't matter at all. This thought gave me a little peace of mind. My mother's tailoring shop was still open as usual. The seamstresses still came to work, and customers came and went as if nothing had happened. Around 10:30 a.m., President Duong Van Minh announced on the radio the unconditional surrender to the communists. He said, "This surrender will prevent the unnecessary slaughter of the people," and urged the South Vietnamese army to lay down their weapons in an orderly manner and wait in place to hand them over to the communists. I heard the sound of small gunfire from somewhere nearby. Despite the ceasefire order, some paratroopers stationed near the Cancer Institute close to my mother's house opened fire at VC units and then committed suicide. A few isolated clashes still occurred in Ba Quio Street, near the Hong Hoa Tam paratrooper camp. These desperate soldiers, without any command, initiated the final clashes before taking their own lives. I don't know whether they were heroes or not, but I greatly admired their actions. I didn't have the courage to do that, even though I had considered it when I brought a gun home. It's very difficult to decide to end your life, even in the most hopeless of circumstances. The gunfire gradually subsided. The streets became more and more lively. I didn't see any VC, just children holding M16 rifles and wearing red armbands, riding various vehicles ranging from military trucks to civilian cars taken from the evacuees. People called them the 30th Revolutionaries, meaning those who seized the opportunity to become revolutionaries on April 30th, 1975. They had once been students, civilians, or self-defense force members in their areas. The South Vietnamese soldiers were returning home in their underwear. Their uniforms and weapons had been left somewhere on the streets. General Nguyen Hue Han's call on the radio, urging soldiers and officers to stay in position and wait for handover to the communists, had no effect. Everyone was trying to find a way to escape or return home. Those who had failed to evacuate were rushing back to their homes. People stood at their doorways to see how the VC would behave in their first visit to the city. All of this created a scene full of absurdity. Everyone had different thoughts. South Vietnamese soldiers and officers were worried about their fate. The wealthy were worried about their property, and the poor were waiting for the change in their fortunes promised by the communists. These worries, combined with anticipation, created a strange atmosphere that I had never experienced in my life. During the Tet Offensive, people had fled immediately when they heard the VC were coming. Now, they didn't know where to run because the Viet Cong had already taken control of the whole country. Their fate was no longer in their own hands. They had to wait for something to happen. Hanoi radio ordered the Viet Cong units not to touch even a needle or thread from the people, but some joked that the VC preferred to take more valuable things than needles or threads. Others joked that, from now on, they wouldn't have to fear VC shelling anymore, because the front had liberated Saigon. The people's endurance had been stretched so thin that they could even joke in the face of their total despair. General Nguyen Hue Han's announcement, alongside the voice of Trinh Song Sun in his song Noi Vong Te Lan, Joining Hands, was broadcast continuously on Saigon radio. Trinh Song Sun, a famous South Vietnamese musician in the 1960s and 1970s, had sung anti-war songs with Con Lai at universities throughout South Vietnam to promote student movements against the government. Many times, we had brought this issue to higher authorities, but the government had no reason to suppress them until Trinh Song Sun was drafted. The anti-war and anti-government songs continued until Trinh Song Sun openly became a communist, with his song Noi Vong Te Lan welcoming his comrades from north to south, joining our hands. I didn't know much about General Nguyen Hue Han because I wasn't directly involved in the military. I also didn't know if he was a communist or just an opportunist. Cars, military uniforms, and weapons were scattered all over the streets. Children were playing with M30 rifles and shells, and there had been a few accidents. Some people dismantled the vehicles left behind by evacuees and took whatever they could. There were no more police officers to maintain order, so traffic was blocked and there was chaos. Some young people wearing red armbands took it upon themselves to direct traffic, trying to keep things in order. Around noon, the VC forces entered and seized the Saigon broadcasting station and announced their acceptance of the unconditional surrender of General Duong Van Minh, the last president of what was called the Southern Vietnam Puppet Government. This was the first time I had heard the terms puppet government and puppet army. At the same time, the communists declared that Saigon had become Ho Chi Minh City. I could no longer hear the voices of Trinh Song Sun and Nguyen Hue Han. The song Saigon Quoc Khoi, Saigon Rising, was replaced, and it was also when the people of Saigon first heard a kind of music that was fast-paced and had a melody similar to Chinese music. Saigon had been taken over by the so-called People's Military Administration, headed by General Tran Van Tra. A few Molotov vehicles, the Soviet military trucks, began to appear on the streets, carrying North Vietnamese soldiers in green uniforms and fabric pith helmets, the type worn by the North Vietnamese army. The people flooded the streets to welcome the victorious communist soldiers, young men who seemed out of place in the bright light of Saigon. That was how the people of Saigon prepared for life with the communists. Their fears had come true, and they had to welcome these communist soldiers with joy to hide the anxieties within. I could not tell who was genuinely happy. There were still some people riding bicycles or motorcycles, carrying goods they had taken from abandoned warehouses, mingling with the people who were welcoming the victorious troops. The people of Saigon began to lessen their worries when they saw that the North Vietnamese soldiers looked so disheveled and out of place. Children began to get used to the VC, even climbing onto their tanks. Meanwhile, the Saigon television station was showing footage of a communist tank driving over the gates of the presidential palace, shooting aimlessly at the building, and the communist flag being hoisted atop the palace. The three-color flag of the Southern Liberation Front was hung everywhere. Some Chinese-owned shops even hung the flag of Communist China. The most intense war in 20 years had ended easily. The victors were stunned, and the defeated still could not believe the reality. The Vietnam War had ended, but what would follow after the war? For the officers of the old regime and for myself, of course, we were waiting for revenge. Whatever happened, we had to accept because we had lost. Death seemed to be the last thing. I thought so. But for my people, especially the people of Saigon, what would happen to them now when they had been used to living in freedom? The peace that the communists brought to my country seemed uncomfortable even for those who had no ties to the old regime. The contrast between the northern soldiers and the people of Saigon was too clear, especially in appearance. The messy uniforms and the rubber sandals of the VC were hard for the people of Saigon, who were accustomed to fashion, to accept. Not long after taking over Saigon, the People's Military Administration of Ho Chi Minh City issued a number of regulations aimed at changing the lifestyle of Saigon. Anyone still living in the American style, such as running nightclubs, entertainment venues, or dressing flashily, would be fined. Many young people had their bell-bottom pants and long haircut. On the streets, there were signs of change. The traditional Âu Dai, Vietnamese dress, disappeared and was replaced by the Âu Ba, a traditional southern shirt and black pants. Banners and shop signs changed to a red background with yellow letters. Tu Du Hospital was renamed Maternity Factory. Nguyen Van Hock Hospital became Gia Dinh People's Hospital. The term people was used everywhere. People's Army, People's Police, People's Government, and especially the People's Court. Everything belonged to the people. But the communists controlled everything. In every document of the VC, the title was always the Republic of South Vietnam Independence, Peace, Neutrality, but no one believed this was a neutral country except for the communists. On Thursday, May 1st, 1975, which was also International Labor Day, the VC organized a grand parade featuring T-54 and PT-76 tanks, Soviet SAM missiles, and all sorts of weapons from communist countries. Hundreds of thousands of Saigon residents and surrounding people rushed to watch. I took my wife to her parents' house. The streets were crowded. Although I heard that some provinces in the Mekong Delta had not yet surrendered, the VC announced that they had completed their mission to liberate the country. The parade, held in Saigon, in front of the former presidential palace, was to celebrate their victory. The streets were decorated with a forest of flags and banners in bright red, the color of blood. I saw banners with slogans like, "Nothing is more precious than independence and freedom. Vietnam is one. The Vietnamese people are one. Rivers may dry up, mountains may erode, but this truth will never change." Most of the slogans carried the name of Ho Chi Minh. I don't know if these were true, but one of the slogans made me laugh. It said that Ho Chi Minh was the author. The 10-year plan is to plant trees. The 100-year plan is to plant people. I knew this quote was from Quan Di No, a strategist from the Eastern Zhou period in the 5th century BC. Pictures of Ho Chi Minh were hung everywhere with a caption, "President Ho Chi Minh lives forever in our work." He had once been Vietnam's first communist and an international communist figure in the Soviet Union. Ho Chi Minh passed away in 1969 after his failed attempt to seize the South during the Tet Offensive. At this point, the people of the South realized what they had been hearing about Uncle Ho and the party. In North Vietnam, there was nothing but Uncle Ho and the party. For the people in the communist North, family, homeland, and religion meant nothing except for Uncle Ho and the party. And now, this had become a reality for the people of the South, forcing them to experience what they had heard about before. Thinking about this, I suddenly felt pity for my people. By issuing regulations and new lifestyle, the VC eliminated personal freedom, and by shutting down the press, they ended the people's freedom of speech. What would happen next? The streets from my house to my wife's parents' house were decorated in bright red. The three-colored flag of the Provisional Revolutionary Government of South Vietnam was mixed with the red flag of North Vietnam, and the flag of Communist China hanging in front of every house. Banners and a few signs were also dyed red. The people of Saigon adapted quickly to the new situation. But there were still traces of the old three-striped flags of the Republic of Vietnam drawn up before. The VC did not have enough time to remove all these or the old slogans. Do not listen to what the communists say, but look carefully at what they do, or the country is everything. Losing the country to communists is losing everything. These seem to be mementos to the people, giving them a chance to see the actions of the communists in the coming days. A brutal war had ended easily, but I thought its wounds would not be easy to heal. For the people of the South, who had been used to living in freedom, it would not be easy to live under a dictatorship, especially under communist rule. My brother-in-law Lin and his wife Lon were at my wife's parents' house. They were afraid to stay at their own house alone. Lin told me that we had to report to the office tomorrow, May 2nd, as ordered by Mr. Locke, the former special commissioner. I didn't know what to do because I had heard that the person taking over the office was Nguyen Ta, who had once worked with me when I was in the Internal Affairs Division. Ta had gone into hiding when suspected of being a communist. I once went on a business trip to the Lat with Ta when I was monitoring the activities of the 3rd Force Group, but I thought he only knew my alias and not my real name. I think we have to choose because we can't avoid it forever. Our lives now are like fish on a chopping block. We have no choice but to gamble with fate, Lin said. For us, it's as if we had been dead since yesterday, I replied. I don't care about anything anymore. I will go to the office tomorrow with you to see how things are. But I'm worried about my wife with her pregnancy. We looked at each other in silence. Lynn and I shared the same situation, because both our wives worked at the same office. I didn't know if I should let my wife report in, but she didn't want to stay home and wait for me. She also wanted to accept whatever would happen to us. Moreover, she couldn't escape anywhere because her papers were still in the office, and the VC already knew everything about us.